Hi, Tilda. Welcome to the
Hello.
stream. If you would just give everybody in chat just a quick introduction to yourself. Who are you? What do you do?
Hello, it's so nice to be here. My name is Tilda. I use they, them pronouns, and I am the manager of the Enterprise Evangelism team over at Twilio. So I've been
Yeah,
in
so
tech for like 8 years now or something like that. Yeah.
so for full context, Tilda is my manager, but we get along really great, thankfully. And so obviously, when I started doing the series, I was like, Tilda, you have to be on the show. You have to be on the show. So thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy Friday to be here and chat with us about your unique journey into tech. So
Thank you.
let's go back and start like, where does this start off for you? Like at what point, like do you remember if there was like this like point in your life where you were like, okay, I need to go be a programmer, or did it like how did that journey exactly start for you?
Yes. So when I was 10, I got this book on like Windows 3.1 and I just like read it from cover to cover and I thought it was so cool. And I was like, what if I could be a programmer someday? But it just didn't seem like a very realistic dream because I grew up in a small town in Colorado and I didn't really know anybody who was doing it. So kind of put that dream aside and then I went to college and started studying gender studies because I got super passionate about social justice and stuff.
Very, very cool. So, all right, that's that sounds like a big jump from, oh, I want to be a programmer. This stuff is really cool. I don't think that that's realistic. So then you go into gender studies. So what was that experience like, and what exactly did you end up doing with a degree in gender studies? That's not something that I'm very familiar with.
Yeah, so it was really fun to study because it's, like, intersectional, like, you're looking at gender from the lenses of psychology and history and sociology, and so it's, like, a very broad perspective, and
Hmm.
then, yeah, you graduate and you're like, "What the heck am I gonna do with this?" So I ended up in human resources.
Interesting. Interesting. Okay, so what type of work did you do in human resources, and like what was good about that or bad about that, and what were you passionate about in that position and that role?
Yeah, I was a HR generalist, so I did, like, a little bit of everything, like
Oh, okay.
workplace safety investigations, hiring, um, performance management, and actually it was really fun because people would come. I mean, fun is maybe a strong word, but, like, it resonated with me because people would
Hmm.
come in and have problems like, "I'm getting bullied in the workplace," and I'd be like, "Cool, I'm in a position to actually help you," and we spend so much of our lives at work, right? So that was
Yeah.
pretty fulfilling in some ways.
Yeah, I can see how a position like that is really empowering, because I think that a lot of us, you might hear murmurings of things in the workplace, and a lot of us ask questions like, I'm not really sure what to do. How do I go about doing this? And hopefully, people work in a company that has clearly identified like, hey, if you see something wrong, these are the steps that you need to take. But yeah, I can see being in a role like where you want to help people and improve their lives, especially their work lives, is really, really fulfilling. Because I know, like, when I was a kid, like, I always had the dreams of, like, being in roles like I wanted to be a fireman, or I wanted to be a police officer. Like, I wanted to help people out and, I don't want to say be the hero, but essentially be the hero.
Yeah, that you're one of the more, kind and helpful humans I've met in my, journey on
Oh,
this
thank
earth,
you.
so that story checks out, I gotta say.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I definitely feel like HR for you would probably be a really good fit, just because and just for full context, I'm not saying this because Tilda's my manager. Like, I would say this regardless. Okay, so I
Uh-huh,
feel like
sure.
I need to give the disclaimer. But you're just one of the most kind, empathetic people. And like anytime I've had like any kind of an issue or any kind of a concern, you've just always reached out with compassion and understanding on, how can I help you? How can I serve you? And so I imagine that, HR was probably a really good niche for you to be in while you were in that role.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, it was a good fit, and then in some other ways it wasn't because HR is kinda like DevOps and that people don't come to you like, "Hey, guess what? The servers are running smoothly, everything's great." Like, every time someone comes to you, it's because they're having a problem, and so it's just like it's a and comparatively to being a programmer, like, real talk, it's pretty underpaid, so after about 5 years, I kinda burned out on that.
Oh gosh, yeah, I can imagine. So, you're constantly dealing with, these issues, constantly dealing with, people's stresses and, frustrations, and I'm sure I'm sure it just runs the gamut of, these little nitpicky things that people are getting offended about, or people are getting frustrated with, or, people walking in and saying, I need more money, and, whatever the case may be, all the way to, oh, this is a serious problem. We really need to step in and intervene. Like, I can imagine just the emotional tax that takes on you after time, right?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and so I just kinda I burned out, but then also the thing was I had started dating this woman who was a programmer, and she was like, "You know you could just learn to code, right?" And I was like, "Wait, you could just learn that? Are you serious?"
So what did they do? What kind of programming were they into?
Oh, so at the time, she was actually working at the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, writing code to do, like, science data visualizations.
Wow, that sounds very complicated.
Yeah. Yeah, that it was, but she, like, taught me a little bit of Python, and I was just like, "Oh, oh, I can do this." And then I went to community college, and I took 2 semesters of C++, plus plus, and but none of the colleges in California let you in if you already have a bachelor's degree because the CS programs are really full, and I was like, "I don't know what I'm how do I how do I actually get my foot in the door here? How do I keep learning more?" And then that was when coding schools I hate calling them boot camps because my experience was not military in the slightest, but they were just it was 2013, they were just starting to take off, and I was like, "Okay, this seems like a way to have structure and learn with other people in community," and so I ended up going to a coding school.
Oh, very cool. Okay, so you're a little burned out from HR. You decide, oh, this is cool. I could probably start learning this. And you get into a coding school. So, what are you doing? Like, are you working full time while you're at the coding school? Or did you decide, like, I'm just going to take some time off while I do this thing?
Um, yeah, I had saved up a bunch of money and I just like took a leap of faith that I'd be able to make it into the industry after that. And I just lived off savings for a while and just went to coding school full time. So,
So what was your I've heard a bunch of mixed reactions just from coding schools because I have some friends who have done like code camps and things like that. And some people have really great experiences, and then you have other people who are like, the environment here was garbage. So I just basically ended up leaving and teaching myself. Like, what was your experience like in those coding school that you were involved in?
it was a mixed bag. Like, the freaking weird thing about coding school is like you were the customer and you were also the product.
Wow, that's a weird way to think about it. As like, I guess when you're doing that with college, it's one thing like, okay, I'm paying you and I'm going and I'm taking these classes, but then like with the coding school, like you being the product, like you are basically representing and endorsing that coding school. And so like if your end result is basically like their badge, so to speak. So did you feel like they were really invested in you learning and moving forward, or did you feel more of like a, for lack of a better term, like a product?
I mean, kind of a little of both. But like one really positive aspect of the experience is everybody else in my cohort was really amazing. And actually, fun fact, um, me, Kelly Robinson, Megan Spear, and Kat King at Twilio were all in the same cohort. So
Really? I did not know that. So they
yeah.
all came from the same cohort from the same coding school. That's
Mhm.
amazing. So what What was the primary focus of the coding school? So you said that your partner at the time taught you a little bit of Python or was showing you some Python. So what was the focus in the coding school when you were there?
It was full stack Python. We went to Hackbright. Um, so like the first half of it was like pair programming and doing exercise together, and then like the last half you built a solo project and then you'd show it off to employers. And since it was 2013, it was like coding schools hadn't been like a proven model yet. There was a lot of like,
Mm,
can you possibly learn to code in 3 months? Like, and so there was sort of, I felt like pressure to not to, I don't know, say critical things about the school. I think, I don't know, it's just also really hard. For-profit education is a really tough space as a financially viable model. So, and they're just kind of figuring out how to teach us. But since I'd taken 2 semesters of C++, I came in with a little more knowledge than a lot of the people who'd never coded before and was pretty prepared to hit the ground running, which is good. So,
yeah. Trying to learn coding in 3 months just to me sounds brutal. And that's just because, like, for me, I come from like a more traditional background. Like, I entered college. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I started college as a music major, and then, like, I ended up moving into a computer science information systems degree. And for me, like, my programming stuff just really threw me for a loop. It took me a really long time to like grasp all the different concepts. And I remember, coming home and, telling my wife, like, I'm too dumb to do this. I don't know what I'm thinking. Like, this is awful. I don't understand what I'm doing. Like, how can you possibly learn programming in 3 months? I mean, that just had to have been like all the time just grinding.
yeah, it it was, and I did have a lot of self-doubt and a lot of struggle of like, is this even possible? Can I get into the industry, or am I just like burning my savings with no real plan? And like, I think it's an emotion, like everybody else is in the same boat, and we all tried to be kind and support one another and share tips and tricks on interviewing. And yeah, like I wouldn't have gotten through it, I think, without the support of all the other awesome people in my cohort, because it's scary and vulnerable.
Yeah, I think just based on feedback that I've heard, and even like it resonates with what you're saying, is that one of the great benefits about these programs is the little community that you end up building, and y'all are all kind of going through this together. So like, how much do you think I don't necessarily want to say like your success was dependent upon them, but how much do you think that helped kind of push you along as you were trying to learn, and how much did you really lean into those relationships as y'all kind of learned all at the same time? Was that something that you feel like you relied heavily on, that you felt like you really, really needed, or do you feel like even if you didn't have that, you would have been fine?
I think I could have self-taught, but just like having a structure, like the structure was more important than the pedagogy, if that makes does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, that makes perfect sense. Okay, so I'm trying to like wrap my head around like the framing here. So you're going through this boot camp, and I'm sure like part of the boot camp is like they set you up for interviews after that, right? So what was like the interview process for you when you were trying to like get that, first dev role?
Oh man, it was it was tough. Like they try to kind of teach you algorithms, but it's a little it's it felt crammed in on top of how to actually build a web app. And then you do whiteboarding practice with other people, which is also in front of other people, which is also like, a little bit harrowing. And then at
Mm,
the end, they have this kind of like matchmaking event where you get to show off your project that you built and talk to companies that you might be interested in. And I'm still terrible at whiteboarding. I've got to say, like, it is not like writing code is vulnerable, and doing it while someone is standing there judging you and asking you questions is not an easy thing. And one thing I want to emphasize is that if you're also bad at whiteboarding, you can still have an amazing, awesome career in tech. It's just that I think you have to approach a job search from like depth first rather than breadth first, and like really target those companies that don't use a whiteboarding process. So,
Yeah,
or don't rely on it as heavily.
I feel like the interview process, I was actually having a conversation with a friend earlier who he's a junior developer, he's going for his very first technical role. And I was like, hey, before you go into this interview, let's just have a real conversation about what to expect. And like one of the things that I've run across is you have these companies who do really odd things like, hey, I want you to write, I want you to write this algorithm and I want you to use Notepad. You don't get to use an IDE and you can't use Google for anything. Go, do something, this is kind of a ridiculous example, but go invert a binary tree for me and do it in
Right?
Notepad. Like, how is that
That's not
relevant?
what we do. It's not. It's not at all. It's like institutionalized hazing.
Yeah, and I feel like there are so many instances that I hear about with people who are trying to interview and get into the industry where they're hit with, all right, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to grind these algorithms for 6 months before I start interviewing because I know that that's what I'm going to get hit with. And I feel like that alone is such a huge barrier to entry for some people.
It is. People don't have that kind of time. They don't have that kind of cognitive space of, especially people who are like, marginalized or underestimated in many ways. And you don't even use it mostly. Like I've used a red black tree like one time in my professional career, and then it's just like, from tree import red black tree. So it's ridiculous that we require so much, that many companies require so much of people, but some don't. I hope this continues to change.
Yeah, I think it really has to do with you know, just kind of the culture in science and technology. And I think that one of the things that people are still trying to figure out is like how do you really screen people for these positions? Like I feel like nobody really has a good answer on, what's a good test of whether or not somebody can do the job. And so like one of the things that I've said, and I could be wrong, this is something that I'm just kind of learning. Like I'm more interested to learn when I'm talking to somebody, like how do you think? And how do you go about solving problems? I really don't care if you can write, stuff off the top of your head necessarily, because like I've been a developer for over 13 years and I still have beginner level things that I go and I query and look up on Google because I don't remember the syntax for it.
Mhm.
And so I don't necessarily think that in an interview setting that we should make those things, quote illegal for people to do.
Yeah, I explicitly tell people they can Google things when I'm doing technical interviews, because that is, being able to quickly Google and find information is a more core skill than reversing a linked list on a whiteboard. So,
Yeah, so our friend Jay Walters spot on here. Like he said two different things, like how do you learn and how do you communicate? Like those are very very complex questions that have very complex answers because we're all human, we all come from different experiences. So like even in this conversation, the way that I approach things and the way that I say things might be completely different than the way that Tilda does, even though we're both speaking English, right? And so
mhm.
we all have these, unique ways of doing things. And so I think like when we approach these technical interviews, like whether you're a junior developer or like a super seasoned developer, like I'm like me personally, I would be interested in, you know, how do you learn? How do you communicate with people? How does your brain work when you're trying to solve problems? Like all of those kinds of things are the things I'm interested in. I really don't care if you 100%, like obviously I care about your technical abilities, but I care more about some of those other things more than are you going to write this code perfectly from the top of your head without Googling anything? Because, you know, if anybody who is currently in chat can tell me that they have not used Google today to solve a problem, then I will send them free stuff right now. But I mean, you cannot tell me that there is a developer here who has not Googled something or tried to look something up. Either that or they're just not working.
Absolutely, could not agree more.
So you go through the interview process. What was the first gig? Where did you land?
I landed at Pinterest, which was, um, it was,
Wow.
yeah, I was so lucky. um, and privileged, right? So what happened, I actually when I got to the onsite, they had gave me 2 technical interviews, and one of them I absolutely bombed. Um, like, I had been cramming on, like, tree traversal algorithms and stuff, and so, like, one of the interviews was more algorithm-based, that one was fine, and then the other one, they're like, "Write a form in HTML," and I was like, they didn't teach me that in coding school, sorry." But here's the thing, like, I use Pinterest and I love Pinterest, and I was like, "Well, since I'm here, we have this awkward half an hour to fill. I'm just gonna use this time to get my questions answered." Like, why does it take 20 clicks to pin something? Like, how do you decide what you're gonna build into the product? And in
Mm.
retrospect, that conversation was part of what got me the job because Pinterest values people who use the product and care about it. And so I think and you can learn to write a form in HTML and it wasn't necessarily my fault that they asked me something that I just hadn't been taught yet. So
Yeah, and I think in scenarios like that, like so many people feel like, that right there would have been the end of the interview for them. Like they're like, oh gosh, if they ask me a question that I don't know the answer to, I am screwed. Like it's over. So, I think it's great that you started asking questions like that. And I think that kind of goes back to what we were talking about just a minute ago. It's like more of like, how do you think and how do you look at things and how do you analyze things and that kind of stuff. So what was your brand new, this is the first gig. Obviously Pinterest is a huge company. So wow. What was your like primary role? What kind of stuff were you doing while you were there?
I was on the web team, so we were like building the platform. We had all of our components written in. We had like a custom components framework that was built on top of Backbone JS that we were like maintaining and extending for other teams. So
Hmm.
I was just terrified they'd figure out that I didn't know anything and let me go, especially because they had brought me on like a contract basis at first, but they also gave me like plenty of mentorship and support. So it was actually overall a really amazing environment, and I'm so grateful.
Yeah, I think so. I think that I had that feeling like my entire first year as a development intern. I was like, they're gonna figure out I'm dumb and that I don't know how to do anything. I'm gonna lose my job. They keep talking in acronyms and I don't know what the heck anybody is saying. So I keep having to like go home and decode everything. Oh my gosh, like seriously, that was like my life for an entire year when I first got into development.
Yes, that's so real. Like I came in on my first day and there's an incident and people were like, the tornadoes are 500ing. And I was like, are you speaking English? I am so confused. Am I supposed to know what that means?
Oh
And
my gosh. Yeah,
it
and so for full context, chat, I when I started at Twilio, one of the things that I was given was actually a link to an acronym decoder, and that acronym decoder was actually extremely helpful. But one of the funniest stories, I laugh about it now, but it was so frustrating when I first started out. Like, I would sit around the lunch table and like hear everybody talking, and so this is for I want to say this was like back in 2008. I'm a brand new IT intern. I really wasn't like super skilled as, a technology person. I'm sitting around the table and everybody keeps talking about IE. And I have no clue what they're talking about. Absolutely no clue. Until like a month later when somebody finally said, "Oh, IE Internet Explorer." I was like, "That's what that means? Are you kidding me?" Like, and the entire time I just like felt like that was stuff that I was supposed to know, and I wasn't like if I ask that question, then they're all gonna really know how dumb I am. So, you better keep your mouth shut and not say anything.
oh, so relatable.
So, okay, so how long were you at Pinterest for?
I worked at Pinterest for just under 5 years. And the thing that I'm the most proud of that I did there is actually I built expanded gender options into the product. So when I first started at Pinterest, you know had to put in male or female to sign up, and I was like, we shouldn't be doing that. And then the every company culture has good things and bad things, and one of the bad
Hmm.
things about Pinterest is they reorged like every other month, and as you can imagine, this caused a terrible code ownership problem, but I realized I could leverage organizational chaos to advance my social justice warrior agenda, and I was just like, I'm building this project. So
Wow, that's awesome. So, did you just kind of like spearhead it and say, "Hey, this is a problem. I'm just going to go ahead and take this," and like amidst the chaos, you were like, "Oh, by the way, I built this thing."
yeah, actually, so the first thing I did was I put it on the settings page because the settings page is like your junk drawer of any application and no one really cares what you put there. And then it took some political wrangling to like get it on the sign up page because if you're a advertising based product, it's that's your most important page. Like every pixel on that page matters. But actually,
Hmm.
I did that and then that was my first ever. I was like, oh, this is a cool story. I'm gonna give a talk about it. And that was my first public speaking I ever did in the tech industry was the talk about how I built expanded gender options at Pinterest. So,
Wow. So, was there? I'm just curious. Like from the organization, was there ever like any pushback on that?
yes, oh my god, um the manager of the like sign up page team was like absolutely not and the project kind of stalled for a while, but then there was a reorg and he ended up being my manager and I was like, if you want me to trust you and continue to be on your team, like help me figure out a path forward on how to ship this. And he like got a designer and we ran some A/B experiments to prove that it wasn't gonna like tank our sign up rate to add this thing. And as a part of that, we like or like how many people would actually use this? And it was like 1/2 of 1% of people actually sort of like used an expanded gender option. And that was how I ended up coming out to myself as non-binary actually, because I was like, oh, I thought everybody felt a little uncomfortable when they had to check a box saying their gender, but most people don't care. Maybe I'm different. Shit.
Wow. So that's basically like this like starting point of not only like wanting to be more inclusive of people and making sure that they don't necessarily have to feel that way, but also like kind of like an awakening of, oh wow, like this really is a thing for me.
Yeah, building things teaches you things about yourself that are surprising, and so
Wow.
that was amazing.
So I'm kind of curious, like you built this thing at Pinterest, and then what was the next journey? Like, what was the next challenge that you hopped into?
Well, I gave this talk and it was really well received, and I was like, "Oh, public speaking is a ton of fun," and I did a bunch of that, and, like, Pinterest was like, "Well, that's cute, but you should have written more code this quarter." Like, they just straight up didn't care, and, I had someone I spoke at JSConf Iceland, was giving a talk about React, and I met this woman who worked at GitHub, and then a few years later, she was like, "Hey, come work at GitHub, like, we have a spot on the Atom Editor team," and I was really interested because GitHub, being a developer-focused company, would give me time to actually do some public speaking during my day job, and it was an open source project, so I'd get to like, experience what what it was like to maintain that professionally, and I just thought it was a really cool, interesting opportunity, and also a distributed remote team. So that all these things are really attractive, and I left Pinterest to go work at GitHub and be an engineer on the Atom team.
So, what year did you make that transition?
That was 2018.
Oh, so you've been doing like full-time remote for a while.
Yeah, since before the pandemic.
Okay, so yeah, with the whole working from home thing was not a shock at all. You were totally cool with that.
Yeah, and I don't want people who were forced into it to think that this is what working from home is always or like this is what remote teams are always like, because if your team is set up that way from the get-go and when you can go out and change your environment, work from coffee shops, and when you're not in a stressful traumatic global pandemic, it's a much better experience, I promise. So
Yeah, I can imagine for a lot of people because I think that there's almost like a little bit of a stigma now, like it's not okay to say you want to go back to the office. Like there's like this whole like group of people that are like, you can't say that, that's bad because you're gonna ruin it for all of us. And like I know for me, the whole working from home thing, it was like I came back from spring break and my boss was like, "Hey, pack up your stuff and go home. Everybody's going into quarantine." And I was like, "What the heck is happening here?"
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm a people person. I like being around other people as well. So, like, having the option to flexibly work from the office when you want to, or work from home if you want to, too, I think is really the way forward so we can, support people that have different preferences. And that seems like the most inclusive possible approach.
Yeah, I'd be in the office every once in a while, but flights to San Francisco are a little expensive. We'll get there though. So GitHub, obviously everybody here probably knows what GitHub is, and it's huge. What was working at GitHub like?
Probably one of the weirdest places I've ever worked. So for starters, like everybody referred to each other by their GitHub handle. So it would be like, "Oh, you should talk to Cheeseburger Backpack about that." And I'd be like, "Excuse me, what?"
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah. And I don't I mean, like, as we had a lot of sort of like freedom to like Pinterest was much more like had clear business goals. And because I worked on something outside of the core product at GitHub, we sort of had a lot more freedom. So what I did, I was like, we need a measurement system to determine which features people are actually using so we can make data-driven decisions about our roadmap. And we need a user research, like even just like a lightweight, driven by us user research process for releasing new features. So that was
Hmm.
the work that I was most interested in. And that was sort of what I built out while I was there.
Oh, very cool. And so you said that you were on the Atom team, which
Yeah.
for context for everybody, Atom was their IDE or their code editor that they built in-house, right?
Yeah, and Adam, no one cares anymore. I mean, I don't know, but Adam has sort of been eaten by VS Code but Adam gave birth to Electron, which is the engine that powers VS Code and it powers um Slack and like many other desktop applications that you may use that are built actually the same way you build a web app. So even though no one's using Adam anymore, it still changed the industry, which is really, really cool.
Yeah, that's a huge impact because there's a ton of Electron apps that are out there now. And I actually remember downloading Atom when in one of the first releases that Atom came out. And I used Atom for a while. But then, like a lot of people, I eventually moved to VS Code when VS Code got released. And for a while, there was another one that was floating around. What was the other one? I think it was it was Sublime Text was the other one. And it was like we kept like hopping between different code editors because we couldn't really find the one that we just loved the most. And so I did a couple of different ones. So GitHub is the role that you had before Twilio, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So you're working on the Atom team, you're doing that kind of stuff. You have some, freedom to do some more, public speaking and things like that. At what point did you look at your trajectory and say, "Yeah, I want to be a developer evangelist"? Like where was that, light bulb for you?
Well, I think I took Kelly Robinson out for coffee at uh Phil's Coffee, like about when I joined GitHub, and I was like, I'm considering this as a long-term path because I like code and I like people. And Kelly gave me some really thoughtful advice that I'm going to share with you, which is that, developer relations, much like product, is so broad and like companies mean very different things when they say that. So get clarity on like exactly what does DevRel mean to the company that you're applying for, which I thought was just spot on advice. So
Yeah, that's huge. I had a conversation with somebody about that the other day because you hear terms like developer evangelism and developer advocacy, and depending on the company that you're talking to, those could be vastly different roles. Because like even what we do in our team on a day-to-day basis is very different from like a traditional developer relations role.
yes, and like I'm interviewing we have an open role right now, and I'm interviewing people and just sort of clarifying, like, what exactly do we mean by that specifically is like a big portion of the initial conversation that we're having. But yeah, I was trying to choose, do I want to be in DevRel or do I want to be a manager? And then GitHub offered me the chance to manage a subset of the Atom team, and then I said yes, and then I took the job offer at Twilio and left like 2 weeks later, which was super awkward, but, like, you just can't control the timing of these things, and,
Yeah.
I it is what it is, so but it was the right call because I've had such a great time at Twilio, and now I'm managing a team, so it's like I didn't have to choose in some ways. I get to be in DevRel and I get to be manager, so I win.
Yeah. So what was your favorite thing? Like if you had to pin down like the one big thing, like what's your favorite thing about DevRel?
Just like the chance to help people, like when a developer's eyes light up and they're like, "Oh, I made it work. I'm magic." Like that is the spark that keeps me going.
Yeah, yeah, I that totally resonates with me. It's like because like when you build something for the first time or you get code to run, you feel like a wizard. Like you feel like you just did something impossible and you made it possible. That's definitely like one of those, you know, big moments in every developer's life, or like, you're hacking against a big problem and you're trying to figure it out, and like all of a sudden like everything works. And it's kind of like the meme of like, I hate programming, I hate programming, why did I do this? I'm questioning all of my life decisions, and then everything works, and then you're like, oh wait, I love programming again.
Yeah. T. Drayson has a great question in the chat. Says, how does DevRel compare to Evangelist? What's the difference? So I'd say that DevRel is like the broad umbrella term for like any kind of work where you're sort of helping developers build, getting them excited about technology. And whereas evangelism is like, it means different things at different companies. And it's actually a little controversial because some people are like, why are you using a word that has religious connotations to describe your work? But sort of how I think about it is like, developer advocacy is more like bringing feedback back from developers who are using the thing, and then evangelism is like more outward focused, like you're getting people excited about technology and giving them the tools to get started with your APIs. But Chris, what do you think?
No, I think that's spot on. And like I have heard like some people feel a little odd about the word evangelist, but like the way that I think about it is like, people evangelize things all the time. Like when you go out to a brand new restaurant and the restaurant's amazing and you want to tell all of your friends about it, you're evangelizing the restaurant. And so I think that that's kind of just like really good framing for essentially what we do. And I think that's one of the reasons why, like for me, one of the things that was important for me was to like really love Twilio as a product before I became a developer evangelist, because it's really hard to evangelize something that you don't believe in. And so
Hmm.
I think that's one of the things that like people should kind of think about when if they're looking to get into DevRel and they're looking at different roles. Like I think that you really need to be in line with a company that you feel passionate about, and like be working with a product that you feel passionate about, because obviously that's just going to help set you up for success a lot better than if you're trying if you're trying to evangelize something you really don't like.
Absolutely, could not agree more.
Yeah, and our friend UK here has a great point. Like, unfortunately, it was used as a catch-all early on in DevRel becoming a thing. So evangelist was just kind of like this umbrella blanket term that a lot of people use. And so, like, I've talked to a couple of different people, and like what you said earlier, like it's really, really important if you're looking at the landscape and you're trying to figure out if this is something that you might want to do like now or eventually. You really need to get clear definition from the company that you're talking to as to what they mean, because unfortunately the job postings don't really give you the full context. And so I think it's really important, like if you're having conversations with companies about like what does DevRel look like here versus other companies, is a really important thing to ask.
Yeah, and then White Panther also brings up you have developer experience engineers, and that's yeah, because some people are just solely building tooling and integrations to make a developer experience better. And so yeah, like there's and some people do like community management, and like for moderation and getting online communities to grow. So there's just like a whole smorgasbord of things you could do. And if you're interested in learning more, the book that was the most helpful to me was Mary Thangwall's The Business Value of Developer Relations. And it just has like a pile of avocados on the cover. Super great book. Would highly recommend checking it out.
No, that's great. That's super super helpful. Because that's like one of the questions that I get a lot from people is like, what is developer evangelism? How do I get into this thing? And I totally understand the questions because I was asking the same thing a year ago. I was bugging a ton of people who are already in those roles, like, what is this thing? Okay, I'm interested. How do I, get into it and all of that? So I think that those are conversations that tend to happen a lot, especially with people learning more about what exactly this wonderful unicorn of developer relations is. So you made a comment about something earlier that I kind of want to circle back to. So you said that when you were at Pinterest, you noticed that gender only had two options, and that was something that really resonated with you, and you wanted to make it more inclusive. What has your journey in technology been at like for being a non-binary person? Like, what kind of challenges have you faced, or what kind of experiences have you personally had?
Oh, that is such a great question. I mean, I think first and foremost, I had to define like what does being a non-binary person even mean to me, which is like an iterative process, still figuring that out. Um, and but a big, like, I don't know, a big part of it is pronouns, right? And like, I didn't feel comfortable at Pinterest being like, actually, can you use they, them pronouns for me? Just because it felt like such a imposition or a hassle. And
Mm.
then when I worked at GitHub, like, I wasn't going to, but then the person who recruited me, like, sat everybody down beforehand and gave them the pronoun talk, and so everybody just used the right pronouns for me from the get-go, and I was like, "Oh my god, this just relieved this pressure that I didn't even know was there. This is amazing. Now I'm gonna insist that everybody in my life refer to me the way that I wanna be referred to." And, like, of course, like, mistakes happen, people screw up, and, like, I'm very it's if people are trying, it's very, easy to forgive you. Um, but yeah, there's just no non-awkward way of correcting people either when they get it wrong. So that's like, a struggle and a challenge that I'll continue to face.
Yeah, so I remember, I mean, that's one of the things that, I live in Texas. It's a very Republican state. And so, having interactions with people who use different pronouns is not something that happens very often. And so I remember I actually had a lot of anxiety because like one of my personal fears is, misgendering and, potentially, offending or, hurting, someone. And so like I was talking to a friend of mine and I was like, "Hey, I think I misgendered somebody. I don't know what to do here." And they were like, "Yeah, just let it go and don't do it again. Don't bring it back up." Is that kind of like what you would say to somebody who, might slip and, say something that they weren't thinking? And would you say for them to, yeah, you should totally apologize, or does it depend?
That is also a great question. I would say like apologize quickly and then move on. Don't make it about yourself because people who are like, I am so sorry. Oh my God. It's like you're just making it worse. And like a quick
Mm.
acknowledgement is fine, but like it's a thing that happens. Don't make it a big deal. Just like, yeah, move on and try not to do it again. And like, even as a non binary person, I screw up other people's pronouns too. And it happens. And yeah, just apologize and move on.
Yeah, I remember I had a conversation with somebody because, sometimes you have people who have strong opinions about the subject. And they were like, I'm absolutely not going to do this. Yeah, I don't agree with this, yada, yada, yada. And I remember saying to them, when somebody's asking you to do this, they're not necessarily asking your opinion. All they're asking you to do is respect them as a person and, call them what they prefer to be called. Nobody asked you to enter into a debate. And so like I think that, you have people who stand on some of these, issues that they feel, strongly and passionately about. And I'm not saying that people aren't allowed to have their opinions. I just think that, when it comes down to it, everybody needs to say that they are going to respect a person as a person and give them the respect that they are worth as being a fellow human being. And, if they want to engage in debate and they open that up, then feel free, go have your debate and talk about why you think your position. But like my personal stance on it is, you asked to be called this, I'm going to call you that. It's no different than, you know, somebody, shaking your hand and saying, "Hi, I'm so and so. What's your name?"
Yeah, that's that's very well said and thoughtful. So
Yeah, I find it super interesting that you have people who, push back on issues like that. But I think that, at least the experience that I've had and what I've seen so far, and obviously, I'm a human, I'm growing, I'm learning, is that, for the most part, a lot of people in science and tech are, pretty open, pretty gracious humans, and they
yeah,
don't give you a lot of junk for that kind of stuff.
absolutely. Like I think most of the sort of misgendering I encounter is like people who are well intentioned and they just they just don't they're just not thinking about it, or it's an accident and it's not it's not an intentional thing. I haven't encountered people who want to debate my right to exist very often, thankfully. But
Yeah.
it just takes a lot of conscious, intentional work to sort of deprogram yourself from binary thinking. And it's you know, it's a process. But we've, as a society, have gotten much better and more aware over the past 5 years. And I'm just really grateful for that. So,
Yeah, and I think a lot of you actually did a tweet on this the other day, and I found it really interesting. Is like when somebody might misgender and say, yes sir or yes ma'am or something like that, and me coming from a southern state, like it was kind of drilled into me as a child. Like when you're talking to somebody, you say yes sir, yes ma'am, no sir, no ma'am, always. Like that is just what you do. And so like you have this like years of culture and things that you also have to deal with, because this is kind of something that people didn't necessarily, how old am I, 35, so that's not necessarily something that we talked about 30 years ago.
oh, that makes sense. I didn't realize that was like a Southern culture thing, but that
Very
makes
much
a ton of
so.
sense.
Yeah, very much
Ah.
so. Because like I do it to my daughter. I tell her, I'm like, you say, Mr. or Miss, you don't call adults by their first name. And so that was actually something that Michelle and I were trying to be really intentional about is, how do we have Lily do that and still be respectful of, because it's not all the time that you walk up to somebody and you're like, hey, before I address you, what are your pronouns? And you don't necessarily want people to feel like they have to like wear a badge that says, hey, gender me this way. And so like that was something that we were trying to work through because, you have, so many years of history of like, this is just kind of what's drilled into you. And so how do you do that and still like, show the appropriate amount of respect that you're wanting, your kid or yourself to show other people. So it's kind of interesting on like how do you work that language and how do you be respectful of everybody.
Yeah, I mean, I think I wish there was like a gender neutral way of saying sir or ma'am. That would help a lot. But I think, yeah, just and the context of where you are matters a lot geographically, I'm coming to realize. But yeah, I think I just try to be kind and polite and say please and thank you and have a nice day and hope that that's enough. I don't know. There's no easy answer really. So.
Yeah. Well, what we ended up landing on with my kid is I said, Tilda likes to be called Tilda, and that's Tilda's name. So we're gonna call Tilda Tilda. And
Thank you.
so and after that, they were like, oh, okay, sure, that works. But I think it's those little things about like being intentional, and I think that The hard part about it is it's kind of like when you talk about, race or anything else. Like, it's a little uncomfortable. You have to worry about the language that you use. You have to make, because my issue is like I'm always on, like I'm terrified of offending. And so, like, even in having conversations with like our friend Corey Weathers or anybody else, like I'm trying to be like very, very cautious of like the things that I say because I want to be respectful because like I I'm terrified of harming someone with my words and inflicting any kind of harm on them that way. And so it's like one of the things that, I try to be super intentional about. But I think that, you know, we do this in triathlon a lot. We say, in order to get good at triathlon, you have to be comfortable with you have to get comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yes. It's just like writing code, right? Like you're gonna have bugs in your code. It's gonna happen. And that's kind of how if you make a mistake as an ally, that's how you know that you're growing. And people give you feedback about that. That's a gift. And that's how I look at it, even though it's uncomfortable and it sucks. And I certainly have, you know, said things that were racist or sexist or sizist or, otherwise ignorant and like
Yeah.
people, but it's just like misgendering, right? Like, apologize, don't make it about you, and just try to do better, and that's how we grow as people. It's a lifelong process, so
Yeah. Be a good human. So,
Yep.
so what kind of stuff are you working on right now? Like, what kind of stuff do you do? What kind of stuff are you passionate about? And then, like, my next question to follow up on that is, what other things do you do other than developer relations and code and that kind of stuff?
Oh, yeah, so inside of work, we work on developer evangelism for developers who work at large enterprise companies. Because if you work at a large company, you probably have a lot more, different barriers to getting your job done. Like you might need to fight for months for the right to install a new library, and you might, your environment you're working in might be really locked down. So we're specifically focused on that, and
Hmm.
we have a lot of fun with it, doing events and content and um, yeah, that's kind of like our team's focus. Am I missing anything?
No, I mean that's really what we do is we target specifically enterprise developers to help them be successful, and then we get to run cool events to work with them, and they build out proof of concepts over a really short period of time, and then we get to like the real fun job is we basically get to be cheerleaders and tell them how awesome they are and all of the stuff that they built.
Yeah. And then outside of work, I am a power lifter. So I'm like, continually trying to get as soul as possible, and also I'm an artist, and I make abstract geometric architecture paintings. And if you're an artist, by the way, we're having an artist hackathon tomorrow virtually online, and so like it is still and it's free, so if that's something that sounds interesting, we would love to see you there. So
Yeah, and so for everybody in chat, I did drop the link there to the Art Tech Build-a-thon. So, like Tilda said, if you're an artist and that's something that you're interested in, go check out the link and you can still sign up. Kickoff is tomorrow. So, definitely go be a part of that. Is there anywhere specifically where people could go see the artwork that you do, or should they just follow you on Twitter?
just follow me on Twitter. It's like that cobbler has no shoes thing where I don't have a website.
That is
Feel free
so
to
real.
feel free to judge me, but I have an art show coming up in August, and the other person I'm exhibiting with is a much more serious artist, and she's like, "Tilda, you need to have a website. This is not negotiable." And I was like, I'll get it done. So by August, I could commit to having a place where you can actually see my art."
So, so maybe we need to have an internal hackathon called Build Tilda a website.
Yeah, I mean, or I was thinking of hiring a coding school grad to do it as their portfolio piece. So there's like there's options there for how to get it done. But
Right.
before we go, T. Drayson asked how I got into powerlifting. Um, well, when everything first shut down for the pandemic, I was just like vibrating with anxiety and I needed to figure out a way to exercise at home. And I had these weights laying around and I was like, what do I do with these? So I started Googling like YouTube weightlifting videos and started getting into strength training. And then I was like, oh, this is a lot of fun. How do I find community around this? And like organize strength sports is one way of having community. So that's how I started powerlifting. So
Wow, that's awesome. Yeah, I know a lot of people who like picked up interesting hobbies over the pandemic. It's kind of been interesting to hear and see like all the stuff that everybody's been doing. But I know that we got to run. We're locked up on time here. So Tilda, thank you so much for being here. Greatly appreciate you being here and spending some time with us.
thank you. This was so much fun. And thanks to everybody in chat. And I hope you all have a really excellent weekend.